Welcome, friends of the podcast. I am Michael Braithwaite. I have the absolute pleasure of being the host of Jack Amplified, and that is the podcast we brought to you today. And I also, in my other life here at Jack.org, have the absolute pleasure of leading the organization as the CEO. And I'll tell you, we're not big on titles here at Jack.org because what I love about this organization is we're youth-led. Our youth drive it. There'd be no need for my services if we didn't have young people doing the heavy lifting and our frontline heroes who are working day in, day out with youth across the country to for those early interventions, preventions around youth mental health. So this is episode 18, and sadly, this will be our last episode of this season. We'll come back to you in the fall. This is episode number 18. We're going to end with an awesome episode. We have such a power guest today. No pressure, Syndel, but yeah, I think you're going to be really happy, and it's such a wonderful way to end our season. It has been incredible. Every time I come on this podcast, I leave inspired because I'm talking to brilliant, wonderful, inspiring people. And today's guest is no exception to that rule. Today, I am joined by Syndel Thomas Kozar. And Syndel, we always thought I could go on and read a bio of you, but it won't do justice. So I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who Syndel is.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me here today. And what an honor it is to be the season finale. So thank you so much. But yeah, Tanse Syndel Natasiga-san. My name is Syndel Thomas Kozar. I'm a half Plains Cree, half white settler, artist, advocate, and community builder is what I usually like to call myself. I'm neurodivergent, two-spirited. I have, worked through my struggles with mental health as well, and, have built my mental health toolkit to support myself. And a big part of that is my culture as an Indigenous person. So yeah, like I said, I am an Indigenous person. So I am from One Arrow First Nation, Treaty 6 territory, which is just like down the road from Batoche. I feel like a lot of people know where Batoche is. And, but I was born and raised in Melfort, Saskatchewan, which was a prairie community here in Saskatchewan, and I was raised by my granny and papa, who were residential and day school survivors. So I always like preface that and give my background on my life in that way, so people understand like why I'm coming into this work, and the impacts that I've felt, and why I think it's so important to do like the community work and community building that I do now. So alongside all that, I just finished my Bachelor of Arts double honors in Indigenous Studies and Women's and Gender Studies. Thank you so much. It's thank you. It's so amazing to be done, but I'm jumping right back into it and going into my Master's of Arts in Indigenous Studies as well, looking at doing arts-based methodology research to inform Indigenous youth programming. So this is like such a perfect fit and such like a fitting conversation to, lead into inspiring me for my upcoming studies in the fall. So I'm super grateful to be here with you guys today and to chat some more about, the impactful work that Jack.org does. So.
Every time, and you're like just hearing that introduction, I feel so underaccomplished. Good for you, and congratulations on graduation and moving forward. It's incredible, and you know why I say it's inspiring too, because quite often, like there's a lot of negative news out there, and oh, the world is faced with. But when I see young people like yourself, so ambitious and inspired and doing cool stuff, like we're gonna be just fine. We're gonna be okay because of that for sure. So today, what we want to talk about on this podcast, obviously, is about mental health across Canada and mental health for young people, but quite often, I think, as a society, we think we kind of approach it as a one size fits all system, and that doesn't work, right? We wanted today to, dive into the cultural competency, specifically looking at how we can better support Indigenous young people by listening to young leaders like yourself and kind of redefining what wellness looks like on your own terms. And with that being said, I mean, I think the first question I want to ask you, a lot of traditional mental health resources are based on Western ideas like sitting in an office one-on-one with a therapist. Why do these models fall short? Um, and when it comes to lived realities of Indigenous young people.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the biggest barriers that I've seen, even in my own personal experience and also my work with a lot of young people, is that, those types of spaces can be really intimidating. And, whether that is a personal bias that like you have or it's something that you didn't really notice is, like a lot of indigenous folks are intimidated by like colonial systems. So, walking in, sitting in an office, that can be really intimidating. And it doesn't really acknowledge like the way that indigenous folks have always like cared for ourselves and cared for one another. It's all about been about community and coming together. It's not about sitting one on one in a clinical setting and supporting each other that way. It's about coming together in sweat ceremonies, in powwows, coming together and sharing stories of strength and power, and then still sharing tears, but sharing tears in a safe space where you have your family and community with you. So I like to think that I think that's why a lot of indigenous people are intimidated by like traditional models of care, and tend to go towards creating their own models or finding a safety in their own spaces, like going towards a friendship center or finding a community group they're comfortable with, or like finding a community online as well. Like a lot of indigenous folks are building spaces where they need to and using the tools that we can, and I think that's really beautiful as well.
Amazing. And correct me if I'm wrong, is there maybe also a lack of trust of, you know,
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, like with the history of colonialism and the history of, what has gone on with our colonial systems, with our indigenous people, I think, yeah, there's that system of mistrust. Like even my granny growing up, she was hesitant to put me in therapy when that was something that I needed to be supported because, again, like she already had that innate mistrust in these systems because of being a residential school survivor. So it's like, can I put my children or my grandchildren in this space when it wasn't like a safe space for me as well? And like I think that's where that intergenerational trauma or intergenerational like understandings come in, because like as much as like we can say like, oh, I understand these systems, I understand like that they're just trying to help me, we still have those like inherited like biases that we got from our family, and like it still like leaves that innate mistrust in us. So I think that's a hard reality, and I think a lot of spaces are doing a lot of work to try and make their spaces like more relational, more welcoming, like group therapy, or offering those medicines and supports with those traditional forms of medicine, so or traditional forms of support. um but yeah, so I think there is a, like we can build that trust, but it's also just like acknowledging where that pain and mistrust came from.
100% with acknowledgement. Um, let's talk about, we talk a lot about prevention at Jack.org, right? Our system's kind of built on that reactionary, uh, platform, but prevention is huge if you actually want to start them early on. When we hear the phrase culture is prevention, can you explain what that means to you personally, and how connecting with heritage or land acts as mental health infrastructure?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just smiling here because it's so like innately related to my own story as well. Like I forgot to mention I'm a storyteller, so you're about to hear some stories today. Um but yeah, so like that's so related to my own journey. Like growing up, like I said, I was raised by my granny and papa in a prairie community in Saskatchewan. And that meant it was like predominantly white, and so I always explain it as like I had a connection to my culture, but through a thinly veiled sheet. Like my grandparents spoke Cree growing up in the house, but they never taught me. We got to go to one powwow a summer, but we never got to dance. We knew family from the community, but we didn't visit that
Mm,
often. So it's like, and I remember my granny saying stuff like, "Oh, well, we wouldn't want you to live on the res. We're trying to give you the best opportunity here." So again, like those innate biases were already in her from the systems that she experienced. So of course, again, with that intergenerational trauma, that impacted me. I never felt like I had the right space growing up in my community. I struggle with neurodivergence that was diagnosed later in life. So for me, what that accumulated as is a lot of mental health issues. I struggle with anxiety, panic disorder, depression, and what that also resulted in later in a little bit later in my adult life, or earlier in my adult life, I should say, in 18, 19, 20, was I was struggling with alcoholism. So I was struggling. A lot of people say, like I was just having fun or just partying, but I know that alcoholism has no age and that what I was doing wasn't healthy. Um, and so I ended up leaving university where I'm a smart girl, as you heard. But I ended up leaving university when I first started, because of my struggles. And I really thought it was all over for me. But I had my greatest savior, which was actually getting pregnant. So that smartened me up real quick, and I um, got sober from alcohol, and I've now been sober for 7 years. And but what that does is once you stop self-medicating with substances, you sort of have to get into the root of your experiences and your mental health struggles. So that's when I really started like focusing on my medication regimen, on my therapy regimen. But of course, along with that, came understanding, the intergenerational traumas, came understanding like my history, came understanding my family, and that's when I started really getting reconnected with my culture. So that's when I started, entering community spaces. That's when I started getting reconnected with my community. That's when I started reconnecting with art, especially as an urban indigenous person. I didn't always have the access to my spaces, especially coming from a smaller center. The events were more limited and more sparse. So I had to find my own, build my own community as well. So like online and through making art at home. And what I found is like that is what really been my like steadfast support in my journey. Since I have stepped away from traditional therapy just because I've been so busy, and my old therapist actually retired, and I haven't found a new one just yet. But all that to say is that I already have those support systems built in with my cultural spaces, with my elders, with my knowledge keepers. So all that to say is that like my culture has really helped me reaffirm and understand my own self and my own journey, and has given me like a space of grounding and understanding, so I can find that comfort and safety in my medicines, in my community spaces, and not to say that like therapy and my medications aren't such an important part of my regimens, but like culture itself too has been such a steadfast core part to my healing journey. And I think that is so true for a lot of Indigenous youth and a lot of Indigenous people on their reconnection journey. And I think that's why I do a lot of the work I do, which is like trying to share Indigenous culture and Indigenous art, from the humble position that I am, knowing that I am a learner and new to my journey as well.
So thank you for sharing that. What a journey. Um, it's interesting to me when I've talked with different people over the years, Indigenous leaders, many who have at first rebel against some of their Indigenous um, community, and then embrace later, right? Like, so that push pull, right? So when you think about like Indigenous youth navigating both the weight of, as you talked about, that intergenerational trauma, and now the like power resurgence of community, which is beautiful, we're trying to balance those things, right? Um, y- you know, uh, how do you see your peers? How do you see people doing that, balancing both those two realities, your advocacy work?
Yeah, for sure. I think that is such a like strong point of conversation right now in this space. Is like how do we balance, understanding like these intergenerational traumas and these intergenerational realities are real and they are impacting our communities, but while also celebrating our strengths and celebrating like the strength in our culture and the power in our culture. And I think that's where I've been seeing a lot of things move towards is that life promotion, that strength based approach. And I think that's really important for our Indigenous youth and our Indigenous like young people is to see like the strength and power in our people first, but then of course like acknowledging like the realities that it took to get here, or the systems that we had to encounter to um, make this all work, right? So I think a lot of amazing organizations like Indigenous Youth Roots and We Matter are doing a lot of great work for promoting Indigenous youth and their stories and uplifting and sharing their voices in a positive way, but while also taking those stories and acknowledging the internal impacts. Like for example, like my story. For example, like I am, yeah, I a lot of people look at me now and would be like, wow, like she is a leader and she's an advocate and she's gone to the UN and she has, she's an artist and does all this community work. But the reality is that I struggle with my neurodivergence. I struggle with my mental illness. I did a lot of things that I wasn't proud of, and like you said, like I struggled with feeling disconnected from my Indigenous identity. I remember growing up and not wanting to be Indigenous and feeling like I needed to like be as quote unquote like white as possible to fit into the spaces that I was in, considering I was in a predominantly white town. But like the reality is that it's because I wasn't seeing the strengths of my people. Like I was only being told of the disadvantages that we faced or of the disparities that our communities faced, and no one when you're a young person trying to like find confidence and trying to find power, you don't want to identify with that. And that is like really hard to say. So I think, um, but like I think there is a way to, acknowledge our people and celebrate them, while also still acknowledging the realities. And I think that is the balance that we play. And I think the best way to do that is, yeah, like I said, strength based step forward, and then also acknowledge the realities that have got us here. I'll never tell my story without like telling the background of how I got here, and because I think that's just as important as the strength base. But of course, I want people to see my power and um, the beauty I bring to community first.
Thank you, Syndel. That's yeah, I love that. I love the strength base piece of that. I was referring to in a different life and career. I did a podcast and interviewed Jesse Thistle from the Ashes, and Jesse talked about when he was younger, telling people he was Italian, right? Instead of because he was again misunderstanding, immaturity of youth, whatever you want to call it. We're all just desperately trying to fit in, and
Exactly.
deep insecurities, right? And then embracing it later in life. For youth living in northern, remote, or reserved communities, the barriers to mental health supports aren't just cultural, they're physical, they're systemic. What do people living in urban centers often misunderstand these challenges?
Yeah, for sure. I think, even me as an urban rural person, I came from a community that is a city by Saskatchewan standards, but likely by no other community standards. Um, that I understand that there are those disparities. So, like, I had a lot of access to a lot of things. So, like, some schooling, regular doctor's visits and stuff like that. But I didn't have the same access to, like, cultural spaces or cultural stores or stuff like that. And then for, Indigenous or rural even more rural and remote communities, those disparities are even worse. That means limited doctors visits, limited access to services and supports or programs. And um and I think so what that means is that we really have to look at creative ways of trying to support our communities, especially our rural and remote communities. So, as someone who understands a little bit of that rural context, me and my co-facilitator, who is from northern remote Alberta, have created something together that tries to combat a little bit of that and support Indigenous young people and community members. So what we did is we created a program called Crafting Kinship, and it is a primarily online arts and culture program created to support Indigenous youth and those in their reconnection journeys to reconnect them with land, culture, and identity through arts and culture. So basically, what that looks like is we do online arts programming at least once a month, and we do online Zoom circles where you can come in whatever capacity you want, camera on, camera off, to really honor like a lot of youth are coming into this space with different confidence levels or different support needs. So it's really to honor like all youth capacities, and you can show up in whatever capacity you'd like and participate how you need. And then to acknowledge some of those accessibility and support needs, we do mailed art bundles. So it's free to sign up, and you get a little mailed art bundle that we call it, and it includes medicine, so we can are all gathered together in community. But what it really contains is everything you need for our activity. So if we're doing something like beading, it has your scissors. To really acknowledge, that some of these communities don't have access to absolutely everything. If we're doing sketching, you have a pencil and eraser. So then that way, a lot of communities, like my friend Caitlin, who is from remote Alberta, says, my store in my community wouldn't have a pencil or eraser. So even if like there's so many amazing like tutorials online or X, Y, and Z and or things you can sign up for, but if you don't have like the materials or the things to be able to participate, that's also such a disparity. So yeah, our program really tries to combat all of that and try to support Indigenous youth and those in their connection journeys to build that capacity. Because we acknowledge that we want our community members participating in person. We know that Indigenous support is so relational and personal in that way, and what our goal is with our program is to build that capacity, build that confidence, build that sense of safety, build their capacity then to be able to continue engaging in community spaces, continue maybe going into therapy, continue engaging with their own community. So then that way they are able to start like accessing those spaces. Because again, if I didn't have the experiences I had with my Indigenous Friendship Center, I probably wouldn't be taking on positions with Jack Talks or doing the work that I do if I wasn't able to build the confidence in the spaces that I had. And I think that really goes to show, like I said, the power of culture and the power of community as like a mental wellness support and as that like confidence giver. So
Incredible. It's so cool. I love how you kind of your education and everything you're doing to support kind of all comes together. And I think like anything, you know, when we think of this is what we're going to do for Indigenous young people, well, there's not one thing, and it looks very different in different parts of Canada. So as you just said, right, urban, rural. What is urban in Saskatchewan, versus somewhere else. So I love that too. Um, so I got to ask you, you're telling your story, resharing it over and over again. You're caring about trauma uh, through the advocacy work you're doing. This is heavy stuff. How do you take care of your own mental well-being while doing that?
yeah, again, I think I am really lucky that, like you said, for me, everything kind of feeds into itself. My art, my culture, my community, they are really both like my life's work and my support system. So I'm really lucky that the work that I do fuels me and the people that I work with, are supportive of me. So, that's really amazing. But of course, like I have my own traditional support. So that's making sure that my mental health toolkit is always, reinforced and supported. So that means, making sure I'm following my medication regimen, making sure I'm following whatever therapy regimens I need, whether that be traditional talk therapy at that time or art therapy I've engaged with, which is amazing, or doing just my own art practice. Like I always said, for me, art is healing, culture is healing. So I know if I'm having like an overwhelmed day or something, I just need to disconnect and step back. I can definitely, step aside, bead, do some beading and listen to a podcast or listen to some of my favorite Indigenous artists, listen to the Jack Talks podcast, and then I can feel refueled and feel better about myself and about the work I do. But yeah, like I said, I think I'm really lucky in the way that the work that I do has just been really fulfilling for me. I've joked that community is my new addiction. Everyone's always like, "How are you so busy? How do you do it all?" And I'm just like, what I do fuels me. I can't imagine my life any other way. So I'm super grateful that I, have found, yeah, my support systems in the work that I do as well.
Awesome. So here's a good question for you too, and no pressure, but if a non-Indigenous ally says, hey, whether it's a teacher, a clinician, or a peer, and they want to support young Indigenous people and their mental health, where should their education actually begin? This is cool. We see people stepping up saying, how can I be part of the solution? What advice would you give?
Yeah, for sure. I think the best way to learn is by experiencing. So, of course, I think do those trainings, do the trauma informed cultural safety training, do the mandated trainings by your workplace that are coming out, which is like amazing. But also like experience community. I think the best way to understand the disparities or the strengths of community is to really be in it. I always tell people, like, for example, my programming that I offer is always open to everyone. Even my program in Crafting Kinship is technically open to everyone. We prioritize Indigenous youth and those on the reconnection journey, but we want to create a space of intercultural learning because the reality is, we need our people to understand, yeah, like our strengths, our stories, our power, for people to truly understand like our communities and how to support them. So that means signing up for events through Crafting Kinship, or signing up through events through your local friendship center, or going into community. Like I said, Indigenous people are so welcoming. They are usually, a lot of our community events are, open to the public, or you can reach out to the community and get an invitation, because the reality is we do want people to understand, we do want people to experience our culture, because that is the best way of supporting one another is through understanding, I think. And I think that's why I try and do a lot of learning as well. I'll be a forever learner. I am just very humble on where I'm at in my journey, and I'll forever be on this journey. So I'm always looking for new community spaces to engage with, new trainings to engage with. So I think it's really just like putting yourself into community, into learning opportunities, and understanding. Looking at the seven sacred teachings, that you're, understanding respect and humility, that, we might never know everything about everything, and that, we just need to hear the people that we're trying to support and I think a great way to hear the people we're trying to support is by participating and being with them in their communities.
Amazing. Love that. Um, so we have a segment we call Talk the Talk. And in the Talk today, we want to look at the word that gets thrown around in the mental health sector a lot, and resilience. We often call Indigenous youth incredibly resilient. Why is that a double-edged sword?
I think, yeah, this is like a big discourse right now is like using that word resilient. I think a lot where a lot of people have that double-edged sword is like, well, yes, we are resilient, but it's like, did we have to be, or why did we have to be? So I think that's kind of where it's like, you're kind of saying we're only strong because of what happened to us. But the reality is that we've always been strong and we will always be strong. That is why our people are still the way we are. That's why we still have our language. That's why we still have that culture. And just because like we are not only strong and only have our power as a result of what happened to us. And I think that's what sometimes resilience is like, oh, you're so strong because of X, Y, Z, or the other. It's like, no, we were already strong, and our culture and our power is what carried us through that. And so I think that's where resilience can be a double edged sword. But I will still like wear that as a badge of honor. I still went through what I went through, and I'm happy to call myself resilient. But I think again, it's just respecting those who might have that contention with the word. And again, it goes back to that humility is like, if someone tells you like, hey, I don't like that word, that is fine. You can say you're strong, or you can move on. And I think it's really acknowledging that it goes back to we're all different. A lot of our communities are different. Even the way a lot of our communities and our people have experienced colonialism is very different. So you won't go from one community to the other. We'll have different experiences and a different acknowledgement of like what that might look like, or our relationship to the colonial communities around us. So I think it again is just like understanding place-based specific teachings, your history, learning those things, um, and then like understanding those things and why things the way they are, and not only putting our strength as a result of that. It's also about learning our history, but also learning our culture and our strength.
Yeah, yeah, and from here too. I mean, I hear you talking about your life experience, even outside of culture, right? And how that's strengthened who you are as a person, and what you've learned from that. So thank you for having the trust and honesty with us. Listen, this is the final question on the final podcast of this year, and it is not a small one, and that is, but it's your opinion. There's no right or wrong here, and that is, what are your hopes for the future of young people's mental health in Canada?
That is definitely a loaded question, but an amazing question to end on. Um, you know, Again, like in my work, I have to be hopeful. I have to look forward. I think sometimes, like in Indigenous studies or in women's and gender studies or looking at history, things can feel pretty bleak, especially even in the context of some of our uh, the context of our world right now. Things can feel pretty bleak. So I think it is important now than ever to focus on a strength-based approach, and that's the work that I do is creating spaces of happiness and community and coming together. And because that's the future I want to envision. That's the future I want to build towards. Is a space of intercultural understanding where we can all support each other and understand each other, and where we want to do that. Like I said, learning and wanting to learn is such a big part of what I do, and if people weren't willing to learn, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. So I think seeing a world where people are willing to learn, willing to understand, I think that is one of the biggest struggles in mental health is this like ignorance. Is that a lot of us just don't understand where we're coming from. We don't understand intersectionality, and I think the best way to support Indigenous young people or all young people is to just like really build in those understandings into excuse me, into the support systems that we have built out. So the education system, the support systems, and um, yeah, I just really want to see more understanding and more love and more kindness. And I really think that is what will really pay off to support our young people right now.
I hear you loud and clear. I mean, I think, and I like because I want a little bit more of your input on this. But if like people walk away from this incredible podcast, and what takeaways would you want them to have? I hear like come from a strength-based approach. There isn't a one size fits all. Love matters. Community matters. Anything else? Any other final kind of thoughts of like if you're walking away from this, here's what I'd really love to sink in.
Yeah, invest in community. Show up, do what you need to do. Like I said, you can listen to this podcast. You can do a lot of learning from your phone and couch, and that is amazing. But like I said, the most learning, the most understanding will come from being in community. So definitely seek out those opportunities to join your local friendship center, to look at your neighboring Indigenous communities, because I promise you that they'll welcome you with open arms, and I would be so grateful to have other people on this journey, because we can't do this work without allies.
Awesome. Beautifully said. A great way to end. Syndel, thank you so much for your time. You just, that energy that you bring of positivity and love and trust, and I think it's just contagious. So thank you for what you do, continue to do. Wish you nothing but success. Can't wait to see what you're up to next. And thank you for being the final guest on our final show of this season.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of the work that Jack.org does.
Incredible. Listen, listeners, what a way to end the season. Yes, this is the last one of the year, but we will be back for season two. So stay tuned on socials for season two updates. In the meantime, we have 18 episodes, incredible young people from across this country, all different types of themes and places to learn. So go back, listen, but hey, share, subscribe, like. This is how we grow. Information is power and growth and love. So please do that. In the meantime, I'm signing off the final season, or sorry, the final episode of the first season, Jack Amplified. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time in season two.